Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Zuellig Pharma's first digital symposium of the year. Titled Achieving Supply Chain Resilience in Today's Digital World, we are delighted to have experts in pharma, tech, security, and blockchain coming together this afternoon to discuss how we can leverage technology and establish greater collaboration to build more resilient supply chains. My name is Michelle, Head of Business of Easy Tracker, and I will be your host this afternoon. In the next few hours, we will dive into an exciting keynote, followed by 2 panel discussions with our invited experts. Participants will have a chance to ask questions during this symposium, so please feel free to use the Zoom Q&A function during the sessions. First up, I'm pleased to introduce Daniel Laverick, VP, Head of Digital and Data Solutions at Zuellig Pharma. Daniel has more than 20 years of experience working in MNCs across pharma, banking, and more. A tech solutions expert, he oversaw the largest SAP migration in Asia to the public cloud in his earlier days at Zuellig Pharma. Since then, he has worked with the team to develop Easy Tracker, the first blockchain end-to-end traceability solution for supply chain connectivity. Daniel currently oversees the strategy and implementation of digital and data solutions in Zuellig Pharma, such as Easy Tracker, Data Analytics, and EasyRx, our B2B healthcare e-commerce platform, with a mission to make healthcare more accessible. Without further ado, please welcome Daniel Laverick.
Dear partners, clients, and invited guests, on behalf of Zuellig Pharma, a very warm welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon, and thank you especially to our esteemed panel who are joining us live and in person for the sessions today. Zuellig Pharma has always held a mission of making healthcare more accessible close to our hearts. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, this became an even more crucial task in the work that we do. The pandemic changed the world, and while technology is getting more sophisticated, so too are the threats, such as counterfeit medicines, fragmented data, and much more. Today, we hope to have meaningful discussions around what are some of the modern-day supply chain threats in pharma, and how we can collectively and effectively deal with them. Achieving supply chain resilience in today's digital world may seem like a daunting task, but I believe if we find the right balance between tech and partners, we can do better to safeguard patient safety and brand trust while making healthcare more accessible. We've lined up an exciting series of discussions and are proud to be joined by our expert panelists from the PSI, Eli Lilly, Interpol, Microsoft, Accenture, SAP, and the Blockchain Association of Singapore. I extend my gratitude to our honourable guests for joining us and enriching us with their sharing and knowledge today. And at the end, we hope you will benefit from understanding how technologies like blockchain could unlock value for your business with end-to-end traceability and greater supply chain resilience. So let's imagine the future of pharma together and be ready to rise above the challenges to come. Thank you, and I wish you a great afternoon ahead.
Thank you, Daniel. It truly is heartening to see the turnout today and be united by our common goal to improve our capabilities through partnerships and technology. Next, let's step into the world of possibilities with Daniel. In his keynote, he will share how we can leverage blockchain to achieve supply chain resilience in today's digital world.
Driving digital transformation and innovation is at the heart of what I do. I'm constantly looking out for emerging technologies and how we can harness them to drive change. With the ever-changing challenges in the supply chain, I know we'll be put to the test, and that is why we need to start thinking ahead and building resilience before it's too late. Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Laverick. I lead digital and data solutions at Zuellig Pharma, where our mission is to break the boundaries with innovation to make healthcare more accessible. In our world today, our supply chains are under threat from increasingly complex factors that are both internal and external. These threats exist across data security, transparency, counterfeiting, among many others, and continue to develop, especially with COVID-19 pandemic. Counterfeits in pharma have always been a critical issue. To show you the enormity of the problem, let me point out some numbers. The World Health Organization reports up to 3 in 10 medicines in developing countries could be falsified. In Southeast Asia alone, consumers spend up to $2.6 billion on counterfeit medicines. And studies show an eroding patient trust due to pharma supply chain disruptions. As a business with 100 years of history in 13 markets around APAC and more than 90% coverage of healthcare customers in key markets in Asia, we've witnessed and experienced how supply chain threats have evolved in the pharma industry. And this first-hand experience makes us even more motivated to find solutions to keep our customers and patients safe from these threats. So let me introduce EasyTracker, the first live production-grade blockchain traceability solution. Our vision is to be the gold standard for supply chain end-to-end traceability from plant to patient. To date, we have more than 2 million products on the blockchain with over 37,000 active users on the mobile app. Given EasyTracker's multi-cloud infrastructure, our partners and customers can connect their nodes from any public cloud with our live solution. We are also working towards interoperability to collaborate with other blockchain networks to further improve supply chain visibility. With a connected ecosystem, we can now gain tremendous insights from our data collected in our dashboards. There are currently 6 key functions on EasyTracker that address some of the most pressing needs of the supply chain. Product authentication, electronic product information, cold chain monitoring, sales rechanneling, patient engagement, and auto-replenishment. And the key element underpinning the successful deployment of EasyTracker is the blockchain. Each of these benefits ensures EasyTracker can enable material traceability, strengthen pharmacovigilance, and improve quality assurance and brand trust for pharma manufacturers. At the same time, patients and healthcare professionals are also empowered with the mobile app for real-time verification of products and the ability to report adverse events. So if counterfeits are such a big problem, who has the responsibility to protect the patients? In a survey conducted by EasyTracker across 7 markets with more than 2,000 respondents, at least 1 in 2 people believe that these 5 parties are equally responsible for product safety. Governments, healthcare practitioners, pharmacies, brand manufacturers, and the consumers themselves. With EasyTracker, we now have a solution that can connect all these parties on one single platform and source of true data. So how can companies adopt blockchain quickly and efficiently in their existing supply chains to improve supply chain resilience? EasyTracker was designed to make adoption simple for our customers. This year, we launched the first multi-cloud blockchain in pharma. Clients can now deploy their own infrastructure to join the blockchain network easily and enjoy faster go-to-market times. The solution is highly scalable, and our microservice architecture can also grow based on different business purposes and requirements. And with this architecture, we're working towards an interoperable future where everyone can see, access, and share information across different blockchains or blockchain networks. Other market-ready components that make EasyTracker easily adopted include digital identity for serialized products so that customers can track product activity on the supply chain journey, predefined warehouse operations, fully integrated with systems such as SAP, proprietary dashboards for data analytics and insights, connectors to integrate with clinics and hospital systems that track product and patient activities, and the EasyTracker mobile app, which empowers patients with real-time verification and the ability to report adverse events. Today, the pharma industry is estimated to be worth more than $400 billion, yet threats and inefficiencies obstruct value being passed on to patients and consumers. EasyTracker ensures all stakeholders get to benefit from improved end-to-end traceability using blockchain, and this includes minimizing supply chain disruptions with better end-to-end visibility and data sharing access, optimize working capital with better resource planning, better patient safety and engagement via direct and real-time patient engagement, and improve digital capabilities where companies are welcome to build new innovations on top of our scalable and trusted secure network. Today, EasyTracker has been successfully rolled out in 4 markets, including Hong Kong, Thailand, Malaysia, and South Korea. In Hong Kong, we've helped identify counterfeit HPV vaccines with over 1.2 million products on the blockchain and more than 115,000 scans, which authorities have been able to use to conduct further investigations. In Thailand, high-value dermal fillers can now be verified using EasyTracker, and this has become a solution to prevent sales rechanneling. Similarly, in Malaysia, EasyTracker has helped track sales rechanneling activities to drive price adherence, minimize margin erosion, and build brand trust. And finally, in South Korea, EasyTracker has helped to enhance cold chain monitoring, which helps customers in preparation for government regulations. Through our proprietary dashboards, pharma manufacturers can use this actionable data for more efficient fraud investigations. With scan data, we can track movement at the individual pack level and zoom in on suspicious behavior. With better visibility, companies can also create data-driven strategies that measure sales effectiveness and improve supply chain resilience overall. What you've seen today is how we can achieve supply chain resilience in today's digital world, despite constantly evolving challenges. We have a ready solution and invite you to join us on the next leg of the journey, where we can use technology to make healthcare even more accessible.
I hope you enjoyed the keynote by Daniel and the insights into how blockchain can be a game changer and effective tool against supply chain threats today. Our first panel features experts with years of experience dealing with counterfeit and substandard drugs. Before we begin, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic with 3 quick questions you'll be receiving on Zoom right now. To join the poll, simply scan the QR code on the screen now with your mobile device. You will be brought to menti.com. Alternatively, you may visit the link and key in the passcode. Next, we will be putting up poll questions and you can select your answer on your device. The very first question that we have here: do you think enough has been done in Asia Pacific to combat drug counterfeiting? We have 30 seconds till the end of this voting. Very interesting results that we are seeing here. So 88% do feel that not enough has been done in Asia Pacific to combat drug counterfeiting. Another 20 seconds to go. Interested to hear what everyone on this Zoom call has to think. Yeah, so an overwhelming majority does feel that not enough is being done in Asia Pacific. Thank you. Second question, please. Who do you think should be responsible for combating drug counterfeiting? Another 30 seconds to go before we finish. All of the above seems to be the overwhelming majority's answer right now. We've got a small proportion that feels that it's pharmaceutical manufacturers. Eight more seconds to go. I think the answer is very clear here. All of the above are responsible for combating drug counterfeiting. The final question that we have here would be, which of the following benefits of supply chain traceability are you most interested in? 30 seconds once again. So it's a half fight between increased supply chain resilience and improved future digital capabilities. Another 10 more seconds to go. All right, Thank you, everyone. Voting is now closed. Thank you for joining us in the poll. It was interesting to see the results. Now, this leads nicely into our first panel discussion, where we'll explore how companies and government are using technology to improve supply chain resilience and combat pharmaceutical crime. Moderating this panel today is Elaine Khoo, Head of Digital Acceleration at Zuellig Pharma. Elaine was previously our Director of Regional Compliance, overseeing compliance functions across 22 business units in 13 countries. Recently, she took on a new challenge to focus on driving digital acceleration. She now strategizes how best to use technology to safeguard and future-proof the business. Joining her today are three esteemed guests. Joining us virtually from Thailand, we have Raymond Velez, Regional Manager of Global Security at Eli Lilly. With years of experience as a fraud investigator at Microsoft and the US FBI, Ray now manages security and anti-counterfeiting operations in the Asia-Pacific region. He is also on the board of directors of a global anti-cybercrime organization. Next, we have Ramesh Raj, Regional Director of the Pharmaceutical Security Institute in Asia-Pacific. He is responsible for improving and strengthening relationships between governments and the pharma industry while carrying out capacity building and training for law enforcement agencies. Ramesh has almost 3 decades of experience in the areas of criminal intelligence gathering, anti-counterfeiting investigations, and more. During his free time, he also lectures in the Department of Pharmacy at the National University of Singapore and consults for the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime. Third, we have Perry Ng, Criminal Intelligence Officer for Interpol's program on illicit goods and global health. Based in Singapore at the Interpol Global Complex for Innovation, Perry supports international cooperation between countries. In his role, he dismantles organized criminal groups that traffic illicit products and raises awareness of counterfeits through law enforcement cooperation between 195 member countries. In addition to Interpol, he has a total of 27 years of police experience. We will begin the session with a discussion on some of the key issues around counterfeit and substandard pharma products and what can be done to combat them. And we will have time for Q&A at the end. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A function in Zoom. We will answer them during the Q&A later. Without further ado, I'll pass over the time to Elaine.
Thank you, Michelle. In today's digital world, threats to pharma supply chain have become even more sophisticated, and hence the need for better end-to-end traceability. Some of these threats include rising cases of counterfeit drugs and products in the region over the last 5 years. In PSI's Global Open Source Report 2020, it showed a 38% increase in counterfeit crimes as compared to 2016. And in our Easy Tracker survey, we had 83% of the consumers surveyed across Asia think that counterfeit medicine, health and wellness products are a problem or serious problem. Yet only 1 in 2 will check if it's a counterfeit product. End-to-end traceability in pharma supply chain is a combined effort of both internal and external factors. Today, we have invited esteemed panelists from PSI, Interpol, and Eli Lilly to discuss how we can efficiently identify such threats and safeguard our consumers. If I haven't warned you, this is an all-friends panel. We've been working closely with each other for some time now. We have in the studio with me today, on my right, Ramesh Raj, definitely not a stranger to Zuellig Pharma. And over on the far right, usually a shy guy who loves his morning tea, Harry from Interpol, not that scary. And over in screen, we have Ray joining us from Bangkok, who's just gotten a new toy over the weekend, and I thank him for the time to leave his toy behind and join us for this panel. Right. So I say all of three of you are very seasoned players in the pharmaceutical crime space. If you could broadly share with us what's the current investigation process when you're notified of counterfeit products. I'll hand it first off to Perry, who's from Interpol, and I'm sure everybody will want to know what they do at Interpol.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. First, I want to thank Zuellig Pharma for inviting Interpol to be part of the panelists in this digital symposium. I think it's very relevant to the current context in fighting against pharmaceutical crime. Briefly, I'll give a quick intro about the structure of Interpol. Interpol, we are an international criminal police organization. We have 195 member countries, and in every member country, we have a National Central Bureau. In short, we call it the NCB, and basically it makes up of the police unit. The NCB acts as a point of contact between Interpol and the law enforcement agencies within the country, and also with other NCBs. So what happened is, part of my work, I coordinate operational matters, working very closely with all the member countries in Interpol. And just to share quickly, whenever a case is detected or reported to us, it can be either from the NCB directly to Interpol, or from a private sector through NCB. Otherwise, it will be our own monitoring of the open source information. So what happens is, whenever such cases comes to us, we will request for additional information. And with those information that we gather, we will move on to analyze what needs to be done. And Interpol, we provides a broad spectrum of policing capabilities, which includes analytical, investigative, and operational support. So in addition to this, we also coordinate case meetings with the countries, and if there is any cross-border elements or anything involving the private sector, we will bring the relevant stakeholders on board the meeting. And it's not going to be a one-time meeting, it's going to be a series of meetings. We keep track of the investigation process, and we gather more info to enhance the country's investigation on the cases. And how we really monitor these cases, if you look at Interpol, we have 195 member countries. On top of that, we have information from the private sector. What we do is that Interpol has our policing capabilities and databases to help us in this aspect. Interpol manages close to about 19 databases, and most of these databases contains information relating to crime as well as criminals. And what happened is that we use these databases to help us to collect information and data to promote the prevention of pharmaceutical crime or even illicit goods, as well as helping us to produce risk assessments and analytical reports on manufacturing hotspots, production sites, tracking the smuggling techniques, illegal routes, etc. So these are how we monitor our cases. But I just want to bring up a point with regards to partnership. I think to really monitor the cases in this global landscape, it's really a partnership and collaboration. The pandemic has taught us many hard lessons and painful ones. And we all know that it's no longer an option for us to work alone, even for law enforcement. So collaboration is important, whether we are from the public sector or the private sector. As you are aware, private sectors has their intelligence, the public sector, the police, the customs, the health regulatory have our own intelligence. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle thing, you know. If each of us has a piece of the puzzle, we don't come together, put them together to form a picture, it's not effective in fighting such crime. So important is the international cooperation and partnership.
Thank you. Harry. And Ramesh, I would see you sort of the middleman.
Yes, I am in the middle.
How would you go about that, in your space, not having all the hands and legs as how Perry would be able to wave the wand, but you're quite powerful in your sense too.
I I choose to think so too as well. Firstly, before I begin, I'd like to thank Zuellig Pharma for inviting us here and to talk and discuss and share this very important but very necessary subject matter, tackling falsified, counterfeit medicines, pharmaceuticals, right? So before that, let me give you some perspective about PSI. PSI is a very unique organization. It's a not-for-profit organization that is based out of DC, Washington, DC. Right? We currently have 40 of the world's biggest pharmaceutical manufacturers as our members. And with this, PSI's role is to build relationship between government agencies, between regulators, and share with them the findings from the pharma industry. Right? And these findings could be based on intelligence, in report, and to facilitate and aid regulators to assist them in their form of investigations. Right. So very quickly to your question, how do we manage this? There are two forms, two ways and two methods. One would be either a discovery from an operation carried out by the pharma industry, right, by the pharmaceutical manufacturer. In the process, they carry out some intelligence and then they will share it with us. What we do is that we will build and tidy up that piece of information and based on other members' finding as well, so that it is no longer a small piece of information. Once that information or that intelligence is built, we then go ahead and share it with law enforcement agencies to assist them. And of course, if it's a really big case, like for instance, in the course of during Operation Pangea, what I will do is that we will work together with Interpol and we share that intelligence to Interpol, and Interpol will then disseminate to 196 countries and to see where the problem is, and then we proceed from there. And the reverse side of it, it could be an instance where law enforcement agencies approach us and inform us that they have an issue on a certain particular person of interest or a business entity of interest, and based on that, our analysts back in DC will look into building the case and to see if there have been any hits that has been given to us over the years. And with that finding, what we do is that then we package it again and then share it back with the law enforcement agencies. So there are many ways. One form of it would be proactive and the other form would be reactive. So it is very case sensitive, but it depends on the climate and on the case itself.
Thanks, Ramesh. And over to Ray, thinking through proactively from the brand owners, manufacturers, and we'd like to hear your perspective too.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. The biggest problem we all face is it's extremely complex. And so whenever we look at the question of, I'm going to rephrase the question, it should be suspect counterfeit product and not necessarily counterfeit. Because most of the time, when we're brought into a situation, there is a product, it may be counterfeit, but people don't know. And so when it's from a patient perspective, the first thing we're trying to understand, is it counterfeit or not? Can we verify that it's counterfeit product? So lots of times on the lower end or at one end of the supply chain, meaning the patient end, we're really not quite sure of the scope of the problem. Is there a problem? Is there another issue involved? And so the scope is a little bit unknown. So what we try to do is we try to create a situation where we take a reactive source of information and try to funnel that into a proactive approach addressing a bigger issue. And there lies a problem, because sometimes that's very, very difficult to do. Sometimes we get referrals from law enforcement or national regulatory agencies or customs, and it's basically the same thing. Is this genuine or not? Is it counterfeit? What can you tell us about the product? So sometimes it's quite an easy question to answer. Other times it's not. Now, I will say to you that the way we approach all investigations is try to understand the underlying business model used by counterfeiters. What model are they using? Are they using e-commerce platforms in Southeast Asia? Are they using online pharmacies in Europe? Are they using other means and methods in other parts of the world? So what we do is, in any particular situation with products that we're looking at, we will basically collect hundreds of thousands of data points into a data set. And the purpose of that is to try to understand the scope of the problem. Is it a problem or not? And where is the problem? Because, you know, before we can talk to Interpol or national regulatory agencies or Ramesh, we have to ourselves understand what the problem is. I can't just go there and say, oh, we've got this product in this country, and this is what we think it is. So what we do is we collect lots and lots of data, mainly public source data. We try to come up with what that's telling us so that we can articulate that with stakeholders. And so I think that part of the problem we have is that not all stakeholders are created equal. Some have higher levels of capabilities, some have lesser, some are more traditionally oriented. And so sometimes what we have to do is we have to try to understand what capabilities and weaknesses stakeholders bring into a situation so we can figure out how we can maximize our talents and the positive side of what we bring to an equation. But it's not, you know, quite as simple. I cannot give you step one is this, step two is this, step three is this, because it all depends on what we're seeing in front of us. A lot of times we can quite quickly tell whether something's counterfeit or not. And based on working on counterfeit drugs for 18 years, I have a sense of what we're looking at and perhaps something about the people involved in the trafficking. But again, it's a very complex situation. If it involves e-commerce platforms in Southeast Asia, I may go to the e-commerce platform. I may go there to their IP team and work with them. If it's another part of the world, I may go somewhere else. I think the biggest thing you have to understand is that you know, in 2022, this business has exploded onto the scene. Everything is online, and in that situation, it's a very, very complex environment. And that's why I think that it is important for the stakeholders to work together to bring up levels of proficiency in dealing with the issue, and then be able to get governments also on board on how to address the issues. All that is very complex to coordinate.
That's right, Ray. You know, Easy Tracker was launched just before the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, and yet we continue to see patients scanning a lot in Thailand and Hong Kong, especially, to verify the distribution source. This is a sign that there was no break from the counterfeiters during the pandemic. And moving on, I was also, you know, wanting to bring across, we talked a lot about partnerships, you know, from Perry and Ramesh, and, you know, with the private sector as well, so over on Ray's side, the brand owners and manufacturers. And how has technology and partnerships helped your work in fighting these counterfeits? And if there were anything that was special, or we had challenges or advancements due to this COVID pandemic that might have shaped the world. You know, Ramesh, in your PSI Open report, you've shared that it's time to reform, reinvent, and re-energize the mode and method of combating pharmaceutical crime. Share with us your thoughts on this, you know, to make that comment.
Okay, all right, great. So that comment actually was in the thick of the pandemic. It was actually out of frustration and desperation, because in the global scale, when everything was in lockdown, Interpol was still seizing in their operations counterfeit masks, counterfeit PPEs. We were still seeing, even before the name vaccines were coming out, we saw in Asia possible counterfeit vaccines surfacing, right? So, and everybody was alarmed as to how was this being possible. And thanks to the COVID pandemic as well, the way that we embrace technology is actually expedited by 5 years. So, and with what Ray is saying as well, you know, now everything is an explosion of online. So there's a lot of learning things that we are looking at because we are still struggling to cope with it. There are fewer instances where you have outlets actually selling counterfeit products. Now everything is being sold online, and online pharmacies as well. So we are still trying to understand the wave, and we collectively, as what Ray mentioned, we still are collecting data, right? And with this data, we want to see how best we can tackle and action. So to my quote very specifically is this: to law enforcement agencies, regulators, I think it is time to come out of the box, because you would have a certain form of intelligence, certain sets of intelligence, and we would have a certain set of intelligence. And like what Perry mentioned as well, until these puzzles come together, right, these jigsaw sets come together, we will not be able to solve the puzzle, right? And for pharma industries and other NGOs and like-minded agencies, it is also possible to see where things are lacking in terms of technology or in terms of partnership. Come on board, embrace this, and let's start some data sharing. Because if you really look at it, criminals do not have this red tape. All it takes for them is to understand where to make the money and how to make the money, and they are there. It is us who are actually creating our own hurdles. So that's where my quote was coming from.
Thanks, Ramesh. And Perry, you've always been drumming, with us in discussions, the importance of private-public sector partnership. If you could elaborate more from an Interpol perspective.
Yeah, so even though I'm from the Illicit Market Subdirectorate of Interpol under the Illicit Goods and Global Health Program, within Interpol, we work internally with all units that helps to tackle these counterfeit issues. So in terms of technology, yes, definitely technology has helped us in fighting against counterfeit. And in Interpol, we have the cybercrime unit, which addresses the crimes that is found on the cyber landscape with the help of tools and capabilities, as well as their collaboration with the private sector within the relevant industries. So what I want to say today is that we all know that the cyber landscape is borderless, and there are increasing numbers of criminal activities happening online. I can bring you back to the last year's edition of Operation Pangaea 14 in 2021. During that operation, we had a clear observation about how criminals exploited the cyber landscape to commit their crime. One is that we saw increasing numbers of online pharmacies, and this has benefited or created opportunities for the criminals to carry out their criminal activities, hiding themselves at the back of the scene, keeping law enforcement busy tracking their identities. And on top of that, we also see that the cyber landscape is complex. The criminals are moving from platform to platform, using their fictitious identities to advertise and sell illicit pharmaceutical products. So on this note, I think last year we had a very significant result. We had record numbers of illicit websites taken down with the close collaboration and coordination with all 195 member countries through their partnership with the private sector as well. And moving forward, Interpol's aim not to just shut down websites, but we want to target and apprehend the bad actors behind these illicit websites, because that's the only way that we can root out the cause of the problem. And for my unit, basically we focus on partnership and collaboration. We work very closely with the relevant stakeholders in the private sector, from the e-commerce companies, payment providers, logistical companies, supply chain solution like Zuellig Pharma, and even for international organizations like PSI. So I've known Elaine and Ramesh for a while. So we are working very closely to counter this aspect of the crime. Yeah.
Thanks, Perry. Ray, both you and I are from the private sector, and very often we've had not enough resources and we need to prioritize. Maybe you share with us then, how do you work efficiently and effectively with those limitations?
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest problem you have is that even for governments, right? Even for governments, it's an immense challenge to keep up with it. And so, really, going back to what I said earlier, you have to be able to articulate what the problem is, and you can only do that with good data. And with good data, then you can understand perhaps how you can persuade other stakeholders to work with you to address the issue. In terms of technology, how is it? The saddest thing is that, and it isn't because companies aren't willing to take on technology, but the counterfeiters are always one step ahead in terms of technology. So technology for some of the stakeholders is a bit behind. And one of the main reasons is that we don't have access to traffickers of suspect product and their database, their data set. We don't have that. And so it's really important that you try to understand, articulate what the problem areas are. Let's say Perry said online pharmacies, e-commerce platforms. And the reason why you need to do that, who's got the best data on the planet? It's going to be companies like, social media companies. It's going to be e-commerce platforms. It's going to be perhaps other organizations. It can be the financials. They've got data sets.
Right.
In order to understand what to do, what the next step is, you've got to be able to partner and convince these other entities to work with you and implement or use their data sets to assist the process. And that's exactly what governments need also. They don't have access to the data sets also, not the kind that's needed in order to understand the problem.
Right.
During the pandemic, I've seen very few what I would consider to be advancements that are, other than the fact that, right now, there's countless, I won't say countless, there's lots of different treatments for COVID-19 that's available, not just vaccines. And we've seen that in some marketplaces, suspect product, they're offering all kinds of suspect product, not just one particular product. And so we have found that there's a commonality in some of the issues that we all face, and therefore the sharing of information is quite important. But again, we come down to the point where now that we have the information, can we persuade social media that some of the traffickers use, right? Can we persuade e-commerce platforms, either business to consumer, business to business, to assist us? And sometimes that's not easy, right? So what we have to do is be able to articulate the issues, find partners in the private sector, big tech, and to assist us, and then somehow either wrap that around in a package that governments are willing to take on. And sometimes that's very complex.
Right. Thanks, Ray. And moving to a point that you've earlier raised, Ray, based on the recent survey we did, we see that consumers tend to identify counterfeits through the appearance of product, packaging, label, logo, text, likely through eyeball comparisons. Definitely not going to be as experienced as you, or like most other of our law enforcement counterparts here as well. We'd like to see, in experience, what other more effective tools and technology that the consumers and organizations are using or can use too. So Ramesh, you have a number of PSI members under your belt, and if you could share a little bit on, what the general tech solutions that have helped fight the threats in supply chain.
Okay, so without going into the exact details because of confidential issues, I think the general ones still apply. It is a revised version of holograms. It's no longer just a simple one, but it's a lot more complicated. The manner that the fonts are being printed is also different. And also there are a lot of security features beneath those fonts, which are constantly changed. And there are also events where these security features are not even made known to the printing firm that actually prints out this label. But then again, exactly like what Ray had mentioned, regardless of how fast members are embracing technology and moving forward, the criminals are already one step ahead of us. So that is always the persistent problem that we have. So, and a lot of people are just now, in terms of looking at technology, a lot of people are still always talking about COVID vaccines, COVID treatment, COVID medications. But truth be told, actually there is other pandemics going around that is hardly spoken of, right? And I think there are other vested interests in embracing technology into those packagings as well. So without going into much details, as I mentioned, These are the few technologies that that companies actually embrace.
Great, thank you. And any areas of improvement you've noticed along pharma supply chain that businesses need to take note of, especially today? Ray, you spoke about big data approach, and how do we convert this approach to be more proactive, where it had always been a more reactive zone?
Good question. I think the only way we can do that is if, I'll give you an example. We've been working a big project for a couple of years, and so we have, the data set's quite huge, but we're able to understand what the issues are in relation to this particular drug from mainly country to country. And so in that kind of process, when we meet with the local affiliate, the leadership of the site or the regional leadership, we can articulate what we think is the best approach going forward in trying to minimize that risk. The biggest problem we face is the consumer not recognizing suspect product, right? We know that. And that's complicated by the fact that, as Ramesh said earlier, that everything's bought online. I mean, online sellers will have a picture of genuine product in their ad. You can't say whether that's, it looks real. And then you've got them selling perhaps the diverted product, approved for another market, sold in this market, whatever the market is, and they say it's cheaper because it's legitimate from another market. So there's a sleight of hand in that process where, because everything is online, consumers have a real dilemma, because if they want to buy the product and the pricing is good, right? Maybe if the pricing is excellent, they may be willing to take the chance to buy that product. So I think that's kind of from my end, that's kind of a gap, because there's a need to educate and form not only the companies, but that consumer end is very important, because that's where they're at, that's where they have some uncertainty and confusion about what they're looking at. Yeah, you can say to them, well, this is the package for this country, and it should be for this country only, and therefore if you buy from an approved drugstore, then this is okay. But the fact is that the reality is, in many places now, things are bought online, and that kind of, and so the risks have changed to that degree. I mean, just think about all of us here on this call. We buy online probably every week, right? Yeah. Well, some people buy pharmaceuticals online often too. So I think that a lot of thinking needs to be focused on how do we address the online distribution of product to the consumer, from let's say a business to consumer operation. How do we address that? An online pharmacy, like Perry said, how do we address the risk there? From a company perspective, we're pretty aware of some of these issues, but I think the key is how do we inform the consumer what those issues are? I mean, let's face it, suspect drugs is not counterfeit currency, okay? If you have a counterfeit note and you feel it's greasy, it feels funny, it looks funny, you're gonna say, well, this is probably counterfeit. But most people, when they're faced with a box and they bought it from a drugstore in any of the countries in the world, they probably don't know. They just assume it's gonna be genuine because they bought it from a neighborhood drugstore. So I think the gap is, how do you address that risk at that consumer level? That's where there needs to be more discussion.
Thanks, Ray. I think that leads on very nicely. Perry, we've seen a lot of education, with the law enforcement agencies, like at least, with my involvement. Which other groups do you think would be another important group to seek that awareness as well? Yeah.
Okay, first, I must say that the pharma supply chain, over the years, I think it has improved in terms of the capabilities to track counterfeit issues. But we cannot be complacent, with the current complex operating environment. We cannot be complacent that this is the best that we have now in this present state. We should continue to look into other resources, other capabilities. within the pharma supply chain. And for businesses, I think what they can do is they have to maintain the integrity of their structure, constantly putting in place reliable processes and stringent system to keep track of any suspicious flow of goods and products. And in terms of educating, I think it's really a broad scope. For example, even the consumers, we need to educate them, such as brand owners need to provide a very seamless avenue for consumers to actually report any suspicious product that they thought is counterfeit, and also to keep the consumers informed, and to really bring across the message to the consumer that if they're not sure, they got to check and authenticate. Okay, because many times for law enforcement, we also depends on the public. If the public don't report, because they are the closest to purchasing those products, and if they don't report, the information will not reach us, it will not reach the brand owners, and nothing can be done. So the public awareness is important, and in our past editions of Operation Pangia, we have been emphasizing a lot of public awareness, and it's really heartening to see our law enforcement agencies within the country stepping up on their public awareness, and not just the traditional way of doing a public awareness, but rather a very creative way, having a radio dialogue session to bring attention to the public of the seriousness of such counterfeit products. Yeah.
Thanks, Perry. Perry's point on consumer awareness is a very important factor. And at Easy Tracker, we're trying to future-proof our solution. We also considered the ease of consumers' usage with the convenient touch point of able to be reassured of the authenticity and the quality of the products. We're also providing them a channel to report back, if they feel that this product is a counterfeit, or if there's any other adverse events that they could need to mention about. Yeah. And the future of fighting counterfeits. What does it look like for your respective, organizations, dashboards? We talk a lot about data, blockchain technology, and any new other partnerships that you would be exploring. I'll hand it still to Perry. There are a number of Interpol initiatives in this space. So what would your future look like?
Okay, I think the future of fighting counterfeit issues is going to be very complex, very challenging, even more challenging than now we are experiencing, because during this period, the 2.5 years, many lessons has been learned, and it has also provided an opportunity for criminals to be more creative in terms of their modus operandi, in terms of how they can carry out their criminal activities. So what Interpol has done is that we are constantly monitoring the operating environment, putting in initiatives, forming up new teams, new units to tackle challenges that is coming our way. The future is definitely very digital. That's why Zuellig Pharma's symposium today, I think, is very relevant. It brings together the different stakeholders from the different businesses and trade. So it's very relevant in this sense. Yeah, thank you.
And Ray, you and I have discussed many times before, we round up the ecosystem with patients, as your earlier response to the question is. Can you share a little bit more to the vision of this into the future?
Yeah, I mean, the future. I mean, I'm gonna rely back to what I said earlier and emphasize that every country is unique to some degree in terms of how suspect product infiltrates that market, right? So you have to understand how countries and regions of the world differ, and how these traffickers can infiltrate the market. They're all a little bit different. So you have to have good data. But one commonality in all these countries of the world is the fact that at that consumer level, the issue is pretty much the same. Whether you get the product from an online pharmacy in Russia, or an e-commerce platform somewhere in Southeast Asia, or a WhatsApp group in another country, right? Or Facebook, they're all somehow or other involved in this to some degree. then at that point, it's important to try to develop a model that consumers can use and go to, and a tool in order to determine what it is that they're looking at. And not only that, you've got to be able to educate, inform, and publicize the availability of the tool in order for them to use the tool, right? Yeah. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean it's going to get rid of all the problem, because some people are not going to want to do that. There's going to be other issues. Some people think it's cheaper from another country, and therefore they're not going to go through a validation process. But I think the key is that if you've got a process, regardless of the country, and the process is to educate the consumer, we're much farther along in terms of addressing the issue. Will it get rid of counterfeit suspect products forever? Of course not. It's going to be with us for a long time. But I think it's important that we address the issue, come together, and I think that way we can minimize the risk. The key is, again, I'm going to emphasize, how do we inform consumers what tools are available in order to address this issue?
Thanks, Ray. And Ramesh, you being the sort of the connector between public and private, anything else for you to add on?
That's why they save the last for best for last. As I mentioned earlier when we started, right, PSI's role here is very, very unique, very fundamental. And it is true, we are the bridge between the pharma industry and the regulators. It is going to be very challenging moving forward, how we leapfrog 5 years ahead in terms of embracing technology. The challenges is just going to escalate from here on. So my 2 cents on this is that everything is going to go online, online, and it's going to be even worsened when now everything is on telemedication, teleconsultation. There's going to be e-pharmacy sprouting up every other month, perhaps. And then where are they going to get the stocks of their medication? How is that going to be delivered? There are several gaps, and it's going to be worse even when we embrace at some point in time in our lives the metaverse, right? People will be going in and people will be starting to sell, among other things, counterfeit drugs as well. So how do we manage this? I don't really specifically have an answer, but if there is one form of technology you want to embrace, then probably we can consider where regulators are working hand in hand with the private sectors for an encoded technology that's only understood and applied by them. So a point in time where any counterfeit product or suspected product or gray market product, unapproved product, whatever we want to call it, appears, there is a signal sent out universally, understood universally, and then actions taken down collaboratively. So I think that's how I would end this.
Thanks, Ramesh. As you have heard from our panelists, fighting threats to pharma supply chain is a concerted effort. The success cannot be done alone. It entails strong public and private collaboration in every aspect, including internal and other external stakeholders. The ability to have quick data for analysis, trends, and other thoughts process is important too. Building awareness is another point that has constantly been repeated here, educating not just the law enforcement agencies, manufacturers, brand owners also bear some responsibility to educate consumers. And together in this ecosystem, we can effectively combat counterfeits and other pharmaceutical crimes. The COVID pandemic has expedited the advancement in technology, we've heard, not just on the manufacturer brand owner side, but as well we would see on the counterfeiter side. But the public and private partnership must embrace this fact, adopt a more collaborative approach to save lives and cripple criminal operations. Our panel today has showcased how the strength of partnerships accelerates the speed of adopting technology and improve supply chain resilience. The next panel will then cover how the technology itself can be built for easy business and consumer adoption. Many thanks again to our esteemed guests, Ramesh, Perry, and Ray over in the panel. to contribute to us today with their valuable insights and experiences. And I now hand over the event back to Michelle.
Built by Zuellig Pharma, an award-winning distributor in Asia, EasyTracker is an end-to-end blockchain solution that improves pharma supply chain connectivity and traceability for patient safety. EasyTracker helps pharma manufacturers, healthcare professionals, and patients via an increase in security and compliance, greater transparency and scalability through these 4 areas. Secure data management with clear chain of custody, ease of verifying product authenticity, and reporting incidents. Ensure optimal temperatures for vaccines by accessing secure and accurate temperature reports with quality assurances. Track, trace, and obtain reports of potential gray market products, which can hurt patient safety and brand trust. Process payments effectively and enjoy hassle-free auto-replenishment as you track and rectify product returns and expired products. Achieve operational excellence with EasyTracker today. Visit easytracker.io or download the EasyTracker app on the Google Play Store or App Store.
Seen some questions stream in during the panel session, and so now we will pass the time back to Elaine and our esteemed panelists here who will answer all the questions that you may have.
Thank you, Michelle.
All the questions?
We have a few questions here. What are some differences and challenges trying to manage and prevent counterfeits in developing and developed markets? Maybe we start off with Perry, yeah.
Okay, there would be definitely differences in managing counterfeit issues in developing and developed countries. And many times, if you look at it, anti-counterfeiting measures and efforts have proven to be a success to a certain extent in some countries. And we have seen this through many of the operations in Interpol. I can refer you to some of the regional operations that we have conducted, targeting counterfeit luxury goods, fashion wares, and even illicit pharmaceuticals. We have achieved successes in this operation in terms of the $1 million seizures, as well as disrupting organized criminal networks. So it's very unique in terms of how these issues are tackled in the 2 different landscape of the countries. It really depends a lot on some of the areas, such as the legislation and regulations, the available resources in the country, as well as the operating environment within the country. So definitely a different country, we will have to look at different strategies because we all know that there's no one strategy that will help us to tackle counterfeit issues globally. And we need to continue to re-strategize, put in the correct solutions depending on the factors when fighting against such crime.
Thanks, Perry. And Ramesh, any inputs from your end?
I think we must understand the fact that globally, each country is in different stages of development. Having said that, it is also should be understood that there will be problems and issues with resources, manpower, legislative exercise, and stuff like that. And more importantly, not all countries will be keen to take on combating for counterfeit drugs. They would have other interests, other priorities where they have to allocate the resources. But the problem here is that, more importantly, again, when criminals, syndicates are involved in dealing in counterfeit drugs, counterfeit pharmaceuticals, they realize that unlike other forms of serious crime, where dealing in Class A narcotics, the punishment and the legislation outcome is just a slap on the wrist. So while the profit that they can generate from counterfeit drugs far exceeds like heroin and cocaine, yet the punishment is far lesser. So that will be one of the biggest problems, because they will always promote criminal syndicates to want to deal with this. And the rest of it, like what Perry mentioned. So this will always be the biggest challenges.
Okay. And we're going through a few more Q&A questions over here, and you'll see who wants to pick this up. It's talking about the digital future. We have a question: what is the most secure method of technology? As going digital is all about cybersecurity, even when using blockchain, hackers are doing a good job.
Okay. Ray, you want to take this first?
Sure. You know, I mean, technology can be very robust. I mean, you know, in the whole process of the supply chain and maintaining the integrity of the product can be very robust. The weakness is when you have to distribute that product, that last mile, from the distributor, from the online pharmacy, from the e-commerce platform to the consumer. And that's the weakness in that. So almost never, and Ramesh can speak to this also, do we see any sort of problem in the movement of product from manufacturing, you know, across the world into distribution, either by plane or by ship or whatever the means of transportation? Do we see an issue with product, knock on wood, where the product is a threat for the consumer? When we see a problem, typically it's with suspect product that is going to go from that basically is furnished by a business consumer presence online to the consumer. So from that perspective, I think that the necessity to focus any sort of technology, any sort of technology to provide the information to the consumer is extremely important. The add-on is how robust the information is kept, the integrity of the information within the supply chain. That's just an add-on, but the whole focus on how to inform the consumer about a particular product, right? I think that's the main issue from my perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just add on
Yep.
what Ray has mentioned. There will never be a case where we have one perfect solution, because the moment we have one perfect solution, this means that we have really come to the end of our journey. So, and also be aware of the fact that criminal syndicates do not have their own R&D, do not have their own technology experts. All they are doing is just to wait and see approach, and once you come out with an almost perfect solution, they just take on it, do some minor tweaks, and then just infiltrate the market. So while we can say that, oh, what we have blockchain technology and all, we have to remember there's still the human functions that always comes in. And in some parts of the world, this human function can be purchased with money. Those will be the challenges.
Right, so there's no one technology that can suffice everything. If not, it stops at the spark. But I think more importantly, how we all work together,
Yes.
Be transparent. You know, of course, we ensure that the information is secured to a certain extent. Yeah.
Ray,
if you want to add on, yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to understand the market where the product is available, right? And because how we deal with that depends on the market where the product is available. And so, and going back to a point I made a long time ago, is the fact that if e-commerce platforms have a major impact on the movement of suspect product, you should be able to piggyback on their information and perhaps use their algorithm in order to minimize the availability of these suspect products on their site, right? I mean, I think that's extremely important to collaborate with the online presence that have that big data that you can use. Now, just because you shut down sellers on a certain e-commerce platform that's offering shoddy suspect product doesn't mean that the problem is finished. But I think that's one way to look at that. So, you know, if the model in Southeast Asia is there's lots of products being sold on e-commerce platforms, And part of the solution is to work with these e-commerce platforms in order to address that issue of how do we keep the sellers off the marketplace. The problem is that drugs always find a way because there's money to be made. But so I think that's why you have to backstop that with the whole consumer piece and how to make sure the consumers at least get some base information or some base tool or some means to determine whether a product is legitimate or not. I think it's a very important point.
Thanks, Ray. And we have another question, GS1 being the preferred standard bearer for the 2D barcoding in many industries, including pharmaceuticals. I can see Ramesh smiling. Obviously, you know quite a fair bit about GS1. How do you fold Easy Tracker, or how would you recommend, Easy Tracker to tie in with this global GS1 strategy?
Okay, this is a tough question. I have to admit that. But in a very general scheme of understanding, I would probably say this. It is very important to have standards, because when you have standards, then you are inviting legitimate business people to come on board to meet that standard, right? But then again, country to country, technology to technology, it may be a little different. So I will not be able to give you a perfect answer, but I think it's good to have standards. And I would say that if Zuellig at some point in time does also embark on this and have that standards, then everybody will see it as a general go-to standard. You have your ISO standard, you have BSI standards, right, something like that. So that's something that you can consider. Yeah.
And I guess, every country would have their different needs for certain other information to add on to GS1. GS1 is just a serialization standard. Yeah, but it is important to, I think each country is unique. But as we all say, if there's something that is able to harmonize, and obviously, it's easier for the ecosystem, I would say again, to be able to read and to be used both private and public space. Yeah. Ray, anything from your end, from a private sector?
In terms of the standards, the more that we can do to integrate standards, the more value it will have for users. There's whenever you've got proprietary or different standards, and that causes problems with different markets. So I think anything you can do to integrate that just adds additional value to the products you're attempting to use. So that's my take on that. You'd hate to have a situation where one market uses this and a different market uses that, and you find out that there's a problem between markets in terms of the movement of suspect product. I think it's important to early on figure out how you can bring those together and convince world governments and organizations that this is the right thing to do.
Right. Thanks, Ray. Moving on to another question, we've seen actually statistics that, Asia has the highest arrest rate in the world. Perry and Ramesh, this is most likely key efforts from the both of you. Maybe something around Operations Panja and more. Share with us, Perry, on this front, how does it make us successful or in Asia compared to the rest of the world?
Okay, from Interpol's perspective, I'm using Operation Panja. In the past editions of Operation Panja, most of the time it happens during the pre-COVID times. But in the last two editions of Panja, it was really challenging for us. Things have changed. The whole global landscape in terms of illicit pharmaceuticals have changed. So we strategize our strategy. Even though Interpol is an international police organization, but we don't just work with the police units. We re-strategize and we work across the public sector, including the customs and the health regulatory. And in the private sector, we broaden our scope of collaboration with more industries. As I mentioned, a few the brand owners, the e-commerce, supply chain solution providers, and even international organization. And regionally, we also work with regional police organization like ASEANAPOL, Europol. This is to strengthen our collaboration in our fight against pharmaceutical crime in Asia. because past editions of Pangea, we saw some trends, some links between the different regions. So it's always good to come together holistically to address the whole issue. And on top of that, we are working towards exploring new opportunities with our partners, both in the public and private sector. We organize meetings and webinars to discuss on intelligence gaps, to provide training to our law enforcement officers, such as how to identify a product and differentiate between counterfeit and the genuine product. And this has created lots of opportunities and successful ones between the public and private sector, because with those events, at the end of the day, the law enforcement agencies from some countries reach out to the private sector. And from there on, they take on the collaboration efforts, and there were several successful cases. And in Pangea last year, we had a very successful case within Asia. We got information from a private sector and then from PSI. It was sent through a National Central Bureau. We look at the information, we work quickly with the country of concern. We organize case meetings, and it was a successful case. We managed to arrest criminals, the suspects, as well as conduct some seizures. And on top of that, I think we also organize international and regional trainings for our member countries, and this has been a good way to bring on experts, together on a platform to share their knowledge and skills to equip our law enforcement officers with the necessary skill sets and knowledge. As we all know, continuous learning is always important. Whatever we have or what knowledge we have today, it will not be relevant for ongoing challenges that we are going to face.
Right. Thanks. And Ramesh, hopefully he hasn't stolen your thunder, but
Answer 101. Okay, but the statistics can be a little cheeky. When you have two of the world's most populous countries in your side of the court, a sneeze can become a cold, right? So any efforts that are undertaken by very big countries, the data, quadruples. But having said that, I would say in the last 4 years, since I came on board PSI, of course, we have been aggressively carrying out and reaching out to government agencies, regulators, having very intimate partnerships with Interpol and now with Zuellig Pharma as well, to bring on board a lot of awareness, and coupled with that, capacity training as well. So we are happy to see that it has paid off, but again, we are not going to sit on the laurels, because at the end of the day, it is about crippling criminal syndicates. So there's still a lot of work to be done, especially when in ASEAN we have like 650 million people who are very broadband penetrated. So the challenge is still an uphill task, and I think we will rise to the occasion.
Right. Fantastic, with this law enforcement work over here, both with Perry and Ramesh as well. We can see there's a lot ongoing. I think if you can visualize, it's probably like somehow in the movies, the raids going on, things are being confiscated and all. Show some excitement. And Ray, from a private sector perspective, how would you have?
I think, Elaine, it's important to understand each country's law enforcement model for investigating suspect conduct. Some countries they go gangbusters in seizing product that's destined for export. That's their model, and that many times, if it's a syndicate organization within the country, they're not exporting. Sometimes that's the weakness. For one reason or other, they don't look at that kind of organization very closely. And then other countries, they focus on all bits and pieces of it. Like, I'll give you a good example, Hong Kong Customs. I mean, between inbound seizures, outbound seizures, it's a complete package. They do a really good job at it. But other countries, they look at counterfeit in a very, it's not always the same model. So I think from my perspective, when I hear there's a case in a certain country, based on my years looking at this, I understand what model they're looking at. It may not be they're interested in looking at a domestic product for that country, but they'll go gangbusters on export. So I think it's important when you're involved in these kind of investigations, talk to Perry, obviously, talk to Ramesh, and get their assessment on the model that law enforcement is using. And it isn't just in Asia I'm talking about, it's all over the world. You'll find other countries, even in Europe and in the Americas, they have different models too. So I think it's important to understand that.
Thanks, Ray. I think very nicely, we actually have two questions fairly similar to the around the world kind of model. I'm going to twig it a little bit so that we can kind of wrap up these questions, two questions into one. There is a audience with us, if we are aware, there is a Turkey being the first country to implement track and trace. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll spin that question a little bit as well, to throw it out to the three of you. If you are aware if there are any Asian markets that have fully gone into track and trace. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take this one first and I'll keep it short so that two of you can jump on that. Turkey, all right. So aside from Turkey, EU has also embraced a very common track and trace program as well, right? To a question, what's the question? Can we adopt something similar to that?
Any other Asian countries would have this track and trace and, the
right. Okay.
positive benefits of that. Right. Yeah.
So obviously the benefits are all there. We know this, right? I'm not going to spell it out. But let me just share the challenges. Unlike EU, where half of Turkey would be part of it as well, within ASEAN, our legislation is not synchronized, especially when we are talking about combating pharmaceutical crime. So again, each country is in different stage of development. If you want to come out with a commons realization process, not all countries will be able to embrace it. Not all countries might want to embrace it. So therein already that lies the problem. So as much as we would want to, one day after the one ASEAN window, probably this would be incorporated. But I think beyond that, before that, I think there are already too many other issues that governments all over the world, I mean in ASEAN especially, are looking at.
Thank you for the information. Very quickly, just to ask, if Perry and Ray have anything else to add on?
Yeah, Elaine, how do you define track and trace?
I think basically you'll be able to know where the product is moving and very quickly get that information. For me, technology-wise, is at your fingertips. Okay.
The reason I ask that is that I don't know how many people on this call are aware, but there's Turkey can be a source country for suspect product, and so we have a situation where they have track and trace, but yet, and Ramesh can talk to this too, that they also have an issue with suspect product also. So whether track and trace is a solution to minimize, the flow of suspect product is something that, has to be thought about with lots of, it has to be thought about in detail. It's complex, but yeah, there's product coming out of there and it's Turkish product and, then they have track and trace. So I think that track and trace isn't a solution, isn't, as something that will solve all problems.
And track and trace is a compliance issue because the moment you miss that compliance aspect of it, the entire track and trace fails. So we need to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. And any last inputs from Perry?
Just to add on what Ray and Ramesh has said. So I think definitely if track and trace is a solution, and I think the countries in Asia would want to explore. But again, it's very dependent on the operating terrain of the countries, because every country has the unique way of managing criminal activities in the country. So it's very dependent on the operating terrain. And I believe if there's a need, the countries will definitely explore into the solution such as track and trace.
And I think sometimes we just need a Kickstarter to go on board. Sometimes you want the Rolls Royce, or sometimes maybe people can only accept a certain part of it, a Toyota Corolla. So it really depends also on the appetite, across the various countries. And I think that marks the end of our Q&A session. Thank you for the audience who have shared the questions with us, and also for the panel again for staying on to help answer these questions, giving again very good information for us to think about, and how do we do all this together in this ecosystem with technology.
As we navigate ongoing concerns about global health, how can we be assured that the medical products we use are genuine and stored safely before they reach us? To improve consumer confidence and safety, Zuellig Pharma has launched Easy Tracker, an innovative and secure blockchain solution. With just one scan, we can track and verify if your product is safe for you, delivering unparalleled levels of quality control and compliance you can trust. Verification is now made easy in the palm of your hand. Download the Easy Tracker app today. An easy solution for your peace of mind.
Thank you, Ray, Ramesh, Perry, and Elaine for an insightful session. There are so many opportunities for us to better tackle counterfeits through adopting new technologies and forging strong partnerships with relevant organizations. Now, in our second panel, our experts in tech will discuss the value blockchain implementation brings to the supply chain. Before we get started, we would love to hear your thoughts once again through another 3 quick questions you'll be receiving on Zoom right now. To join the poll, simply scan the QR code on the screen now with your mobile phone. You'll be brought to menti.com. Alternatively, you may visit the link and key in the passcode. Next, we will be putting up poll questions and you can select your answer on your device. The very first question that we have here is, have you heard of blockchain technology? We have extended the time from 30 seconds to 1 minute because just now during the Menti poll that we had, we got a lot of feedback that 30 seconds wasn't really quite sufficient for all the people. So we have now doubled the time and hopefully that will encourage participation from everyone. So 100% of the people here have heard of blockchain technology. Another 30 more seconds to go. Thank you everyone for voting. It's a relief to know that there's no answer. Second question, do you currently use blockchain in any of your business processes or supply chain? Yes or no? Once again, you have a bit more time to vote. For the 15% that has voted yes, I think it will be really interesting for us to know how do you currently use blockchain in your business process and supply chain. 5 more seconds to the last question that we have. Question number 3. Which of the following benefits of blockchain will you find most important for your supply chain? Very interesting results we have here. That holistic and transparent view for all parties is very important. Thank you. Voting has now closed. Thank you for sharing your opinion on blockchain. Now, in our next panel discussion, our invited guests will discuss how blockchain can help improve supply chain resilience and maximize value from end-to-end traceability. Although blockchain was first popularized by its use in the finance industry, it has now become a game-changing technology for healthcare and pharma. To moderate this discussion, we welcome back Daniel Laverick, Head of Digital and Data Solutions at Zuellig Pharma. Joining Daniel today are our 4 esteemed panelists. First, we have Dr. Ernie Teo, Vice Chairman of the Blockchain Association Singapore, who is also a pioneer of blockchain education. He conceptualized and taught the first blockchain course as part of a degree program at the National University of Singapore. He has also published in the areas of blockchain and fintech, as well as in the IEEE International Conference on Cloud Engineering. Ernie has experience deploying multiple projects covering finance, transport, logistics, and more. Next, we have Dr. Karen Priyadarshini, Regional Business Lead of Worldwide Health at Microsoft Asia. She leads the company's business segment across 17 markets in Asia Pacific and is responsible for implementing initiatives and developing offerings. She desires to create a world of intelligent healthcare through AI and the cloud and enable better access to care, lower costs, and improve outcomes. Third, we have with us today Teng Wai Ying, Managing Director of Accenture Strategy. Wai Ying has over 20 years of cross-industry experience and has helped clients in defining their strategy, business, and operating model from consumer goods to financial and government services. With the digital economy, her work now focuses on the use of new technologies, including distributed ledger technology and Web3. Joining us virtually, we have Lauren Longato, Regional Innovations Experience Leader at SAP. She drives education and adoption of innovations that will impact lives and help the world run better. In her role, Lauren leads blockchain initiatives and the understanding, application, and adoption of intelligent technologies to deliver the right technology for clients. As always, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will answer them in the second half of the session during Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So great to be here. I think we've got a hard act to follow. The first panel was really great. So no pressure on everybody here. And great to see some of the results that we saw from the Mentimeter. You know, very interesting to see that 85% of the respondents aren't currently using blockchain. So hopefully with the panel that we've got today, we can maybe break down some of the myths or the reasons why people aren't currently adopting the solutions. I think when I did the opening address, you know, I talk about supply chain resilience and how we can really start to overcome that. You know, there's disruptions in supply chain, inefficiencies, And really, how do we get a greater transparency and accountability of data? I think we all talk about the pandemic and how it's really driven and accelerated some of the things we're doing. And I guess data sharing is one of those. And for me, I've been on this blockchain journey for maybe 4 or 5 years now. And I've really seen how blockchain has changed from being a buzzword to now being something that's readily accepted and adopted in supply chains. And so how can you really kind of break down these data silos, allow people to exchange data, and join the networks, and really then start to make better decisions and data-driven strategies. And I think the benefits now, we're now seeing are being passed on to patients and consumers, and this will only increase with Web3 and people and the ownership of data. And yeah, how do we kind of close this loop between patients, HCPs, and the pharma manufacturers? So today, I'm really honored to have our panelists from Microsoft, Accenture, SAP joining us virtually, and Blockchain Association of Singapore. And it's all going to be very much an open conversation. Let's have a discussion on how we see blockchain can help really improve supply chains, the resilience, and then how can we maybe help businesses adopt it and drive the most value from it. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I spoke about the pandemic and how it's accelerated the need for data sharing. I think in EasyTracker, we did a survey, which was through consumers, I think about 2,000 plus consumers across a number of markets. And really, it was all parties along the supply chain. And it really, everybody has a place to play here. It's not just one person's responsibility. It goes right the way through the supply chain. And so really, how can blockchain be deployed by different stakeholders to ensure better plant-to-patient processes? And then really, how do businesses maximize or drive value from using blockchain? I think as we're going to start off with blockchain, I guess there's going to be some myths and enigmas around it. Maybe, Ernie, I can kick off with you. It seems though you head up the Blockchain Association of Singapore, and get your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I guess like in terms of the myths regarding blockchain, a lot of people associate it with cryptocurrencies. I guess that's one of the major things, right? And because it is associated with cryptocurrencies, people associate it to scams as well. We see a lot of bad reputation recently in the NFT space where a lot of tokens got stolen. But in actual fact, if we look to the enterprise world and we talk to enterprises, I think there is a growing understanding of what blockchain is and what it can do for enterprises. And the exploration on this has been ongoing for the last 5 to 6 years already. And there is a much deeper understanding. We do see that in the association as well. You can look at the kind of members we have. So we have close to 150 corporate members. And they are not just crypto exchanges, although we do have crypto exchanges as our membership. In our membership, we have solution providers, we have consulting companies, we have legal firms that are interested to be in the space as well, right? So I believe it is getting more mature, and we are getting close to debunking it, I guess. Yeah.
Excellent. No, that's good to know. I think. No, it's great to hear that we're starting to turn the corner on that one. I think maybe, Lorraine, great that you're joining us virtually. Shame you can't be here in person, but yeah, hopefully we get to meet face to face again soon. What are you seeing maybe in the space from SAP? How are they viewing this? Is there a change in maybe enterprise customers thinking around blockchain?
It's interesting you should say that, because there was a time where, and I remember that just a few years ago, where people were saying, oh, it's just a passing phase and a passing fad of technology. Yet more and more, and as Ernie pointed out, it has been adopted. It's got a bit of a dark past as its origin, but it's being adopted more and more to validate supply chains. In the ERP space, we're seeing that customers are needing that sense of trust, needing that provenance, if I could say that. And equally, as you recall, your original origins of when you started to do this, it was that trust, that element of trust that was missing in the supply chain. So when it comes to the world that we're living in, when we talk about what's impacted the world, which is COVID. We're seeing that supply chains have slowed down. There's lack of visibility, lack of transparency. In the ERP space, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of organisations turning to it as a form of relaying that trust, especially in recycling, in commodity trading, and equally in areas that require supply chain level of transparency. I thought it was interesting that we talked about what does transparency mean, and if we look at the transparentar, the original meaning of it of the previous panel, it basically refers to shining through. So if we're talking about shining through, we're seeing companies turning to this kind of technology, but not this technology alone, it's layers of pieces, to relay that value, relay that trust, and relay that supply chain integrity. Because at the end of the day, it is about the integrity and trust in that supply chain that then drives brand equity as well as reliance on that core capability. So we are getting that constant question, especially in the ESG space. So it is very relevant. It's driving social as well as ethical constructs and results. So in the ERP space, we are seeing it not slowing down.
That's great to know, great to hear, and I think it leads very well into kind of the next point. I know, Wai Ying, you've done a lot of work on blockchains, not just in supply chain, across multiple industries. Maybe you can give us a taste or your thoughts about how this is being adopted, how it could it become mainstream? Is it becoming mainstream? And maybe some of the challenges that you've seen and have been overcome.
Okay. So in my experience, and I started working on this about 6 years ago, right? So back then, a lot of it was POC, right? Let's run a POC, let's test the technology, let's try if the ecosystem is ready, and in that respect, whether that organization itself is ready, even beyond the partners and the customers and what's outside of the organization. And I would say that over time and from the years that have gone by, the industry and the maturity of our clients have, in terms of adopting this technology, has certainly matured a lot, right? These days, we don't go to a client and say a POC, or the client would not be suggesting a POC. It is at minimum MVP, right? A minimum viable product, right? It's not about testing the technology works. It's really about the adoption, as what you said, Daniel. It's about not just what's within the organization, but how receptive the other parties within the ecosystem is, right? So typically you would start with a MVE, a minimum viable ecosystem, and then the product, right? And that sets the foundation for what you would be introducing into the market as a MVE. But what is important, and as the market matures, and I see this across various industry, whether it's for mining, for aerospace, and in this case of pharmaceutical as well, right? Beyond the MVP and the MVE, there are many consortiums out there who are also looking at scaling it quite quickly. Right? It's always about the momentum and the conviction, and also having a lead participant, and also a neutral third party to facilitate the process, for the community building to happen, for the value to be derived from the adoption and from the use of the products and services on a blockchain network, right? That at least is the first starting point, and what we're seeing is in our clients is a lot of them are looking even beyond the industry and connecting overseas with some of the other partners as well, right? So certainly has come a long way, and adoption continues to be a challenge, but I personally have put together a few consortiums that have shown success in pushing forward in this front, right? Becomes the industry standard.
Okay, oh, that's good. I know that historically there can be sometimes challenges working with consortiums. Maybe the speed isn't fast, or speed of decision making isn't quick enough. Kind of your thoughts? How did you get past those? How did you make them a success?
Right. So I mentioned, right, in you need a lead participant, and this lead participant should be accepted by the community. But I guess even before the lead participant, it is that common objective and the common vision of the purpose of why you want to set up this community, right? And if you have different voices, how do you then put together a common interest to want to drive forward with the consortium and therefore the enabling technology behind it? And with that in mind, then you have a lead participant, and in most cases, the consortiums will have a neutral party like ourselves to help facilitate this process, because there's quite a bit of sensitivity among the various participants in an ecosystem. They could be competitors among themselves as well, right? Especially in one of the consortiums that I helped put together, there are like 22 banks seated together, right? So when we were doing the business case, the numbers were given by the various banks to us, right? And we compute and draw out the ROI, and we share it back as the final business case, where nobody else in the consortium gets to see the details behind it, right? So that neutral third party plays a very important role in maneuvering around the various stakeholders and in driving that common interest to want to succeed together, because as I see it, a lot of it is going to become an industry standard, right? So in this case of a supply chain traceability, just imagine a day where having supply chain traceability in pharmaceutical products is the industry standard, right? And if you're not part of it, then you're out of the market, right? And as we move towards ESG as well, we could think about how you could capture some of this ESG as part of the supply chain traceability as well. I think that's a very important concept of taking it beyond just it differentiates you, and therefore it drives the biggest interest for a particular organization or party, but that it becomes a standard that almost everybody who is big enough in the industry would want to be to adopt and to be part of it, right?
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Don't worry, Dr. Karen, I haven't forgot about you. I saved the hardest question for you.
Yeah.
No, it's good to see. I know we've done a lot of work with yourself on some solutions in the healthcare space. Maybe you can, with your background and experience in healthcare, maybe you could give us your view on where blockchain plays a part and where's its best use in healthcare.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Daniel. So I think one of the areas where blockchain is a must is around vaccines, right? So I think we worked very closely with Daniel and his team in Zuellig Pharma, where tracking right from where the vaccine lands on the shores to where it reaches, what are some of the changes that are being made, even in the manufacturing side, becomes super important. And I think with this whole 2 years of COVID, it has become very imperative that, we have blockchain as part of the supply chain, especially for vaccines. Given the speed with which these vaccines have come to market, normally one would expect probably 4 to 5 years for such vaccines. But now, given the urgency, we've seen vaccines coming to the market in 6 months. So I would say that's area number one. But moving on from there, I think one of the biggest use cases of blockchain in healthcare is around medical records. You see, most of the medical records are on-prem, and we do very little analytics on them, simply because of the fear that it would be tampered with. And I think that's where blockchain comes in a big way, because it gives that traceability and that security, which is really very important. And this whole COVID pandemic has actually shown us that you need to have a full patient 360-degree view, right? So that's where I think blockchain comes very handy, where you're able to kind of integrate not just your medical records, you're able to kind of include DICOM images, you're able to include your smart wearable data, you'll be able to trace the source and who is modifying that as well. So I think that is one big area. But if I were to stretch that logic a little bit more, one of the things that is the biggest, I would say, cost runners in healthcare is lack of communication, right? Errors due to lack of communication between doctors. So let's say you don't have the medical record in the operating theater, it's probably lying somewhere else, and that's where the communication between the operating surgeon versus the treating clinician breaks down. And research has shown that it costs almost like more than $11 billion a year in terms of errors that happen because of lack of, having those medical records where you need them. So I think that's one area where, in terms of coordinating care between the different stakeholders through a blockchain technology becomes really very useful, especially as we are aging. And we're going to have multiple comorbidities, and you're going to have different specialists talking to each other. And that's where I think blockchain really plays a very important role. Last but not the least, one of the reasons why a lot of healthcare data still stays on-prem is because of security reasons. They're worried that it might fall into the wrong hands, may be misused. And I think that's where blockchain can really elevate that fear so that we're able to kind of use all that rich healthcare data that we're collecting, in different ways through payers, providers, from pharma, and be able to give a very interesting insight into the diseases as well as the care.
Thanks so much, Karen. Very interesting. It's really, I agree. I think EMR is a really strong use case for blockchain, and hopefully we'll start to see this being standardized and some sort of standard there. I think I'd really love to hear, Ernie, from yourself. What are some of the challenges that your members have kind of raised around trying to understand and implement enterprise blockchain, and maybe how did you work with your members or stakeholders to overcome those challenges?
Right. Well, I guess one of the biggest challenges is formation of the consortium or the network, right? And that is always the biggest challenge. And a lot of our members are kind of solution providers, right? They work on different pieces. For example, some of the companies may be providing some sort of like bond trading solution, for example, that they need to sell to a bank. But then, so I guess like when we talk to traditional enterprises, one of the key questions people still ask is blockchain safe, right? And they want to know, is it secure enough, right? So that's a fundamental challenge, right? Because they read on online on some article, it says, oh, blockchain is really secure and much more secure than other systems. But when it really comes down to the discussions of adopting the technology, then they would need to drill down further. And it's kind of very hard to explain blockchain to someone who is not exposed to it. So that's definitely the number one challenge, right? Then when you talk further, they realize that okay, they may need to set up their own networks. They may need to manage these networks, right? They may need to bring in partners to be part of the consortium. That then becomes beyond the scope of the technology department that's accessing this, right? So then that's another challenge that comes along. Right, so I think, so I guess for the past couple of years, that's been the state of enterprise blockchain. But I think, the evolution of Web3, and the kind of concept that it brings along could potentially change this. It may be possible not to just run on consortium-based blockchains anymore, right? When we have Web3 connectivity, we can think about how to use these Web3 mechanisms, right? A very good example in the crypto space is the MetaMask wallet, right? And it connects to all sorts of different applications, right? It brings with you your data, your information to that application, right? So how can we do that then in the enterprise space would be a very interesting area to explore, right? How could we have, we may still have like consortiums of blockchains, right? They form like intranets of sorts within the industry. But how can my data become portable? Right now, as a company, I don't just deal with one consortium. I may deal with multiple, right? So how do I then make my data portable? So Web3 can really be kind of the direction that we want to look at, and how that can be made possible, I think would be very interesting.
Okay, well, that's really good to know here, and I think from here I'm hearing that consortium seem to be quite problematic, or maybe not problematic, but they seem to be one of the hurdles to kind of overcome the adoption of blockchain. Maybe over to Lorraine, maybe you can give a kind of a steer on what are you seeing from SAP's enterprise customers in this space? Are they looking at blockchain to solve specific problems? Is there kind of an appetite for this?
Well, if you recall, when we first started this conversation a few years ago, I think, and I remember the conversation because at the time it wasn't about vaccines. Yep. The conversation was about cancer drugs. Exactly. And that resonated with me, Daniel, because as you know, I'm still carrying my porter hat. I'm a cancer patient, and so therefore it struck a chord with me. So I saw the need because you're expressing stories of 30% of the drugs for cancer care in our region are in fact actually fake. Now that really sparked an interest as to why I wanted to be involved in this consortium when we were actually talking about this. But more importantly, as we started looking into the capability of then if we could eradicate 30% of these fraudulent drugs, and therefore think about it, what is the byproduct of fraudulent drugs? Well, it's actually death. Right, and so as a cancer patient, it was very, very important to me to work diligently with your team and with your collaboration and your partners on this panel as well, Accenture, to actually come up with the right solution. We had to understand the exact problem as it pertained to, at the time, cancer drugs. And then with the discussion came up, wouldn't it be great to look at HVACs based on the fact that 50% of the drugs in our supply chain are not usable by the time they get to the recipient because of the supply chain. So then it brought together the partners in the cold supply chain. It brought together all of the partners that needed to work together. It also brought together the pharmaceutical companies involved in this. And I think Dr. pointed out quite so aptly that vaccines are being done in 3-4 months. Well, now we don't have a telex system to communicate. We have data that moves at an incredible pace. So therefore, the analytics and the augmentation of this information needs to be as pertinent and immediate as the need, right? So I feel that from a consortium perspective, from an ERP perspective, our customers are actually asking this. So we've worked with banks. One of the most significant ones that we did on an ESG panel that actually created a flip-off company, Green Token, which you know about, was in fact a palm oil engagement whereby which we had all the farmers. We designed the application to suit the lowest denominator and make the immediacy of information based on the commodity pricing and cutting out the middleman that was exploiting these people. So from a perspective of what's needed, it is end-to-end collaboration throughout that consortium of participants and parties. I think what we're trying to do, and in an innovation department, we have what we refer to as a human-centered approach towards innovation, whereby which we flush out the characters and we flush out the problems in each component and participants area and bring together what's relevant for that solution, as is the case in your application. At the end of the day, if what you're creating doesn't create business value, then your shareholders, stakeholders and so forth, participants are not going to be involved. So it is about bringing back and driving top line growth through creating new business models, which in fact you've done, because now you've created an application that now you can track down and bring back to base if there's ever a recall with an incredibly expedited time. I believe once you told me that 12 months, sometimes it takes well over 12 months to get a recall. When you started testing the technology, you had everything in store within 2 to 3 weeks. So think about the individuals, think about the supply chain, think about how much value you've created for your organization that then also is creating value for the end user, which is in fact life. So I would have to say one of the most important factors in helping people understand this technology is that collaboration. What we're seeing from a customer perspective, especially as Accenture mentioned, is the ESG component is really driving interest in this technology, because little consumers, big consumers, all consumers now can see the supply chain, and they're going to be more if you could call brand equity, they're going to be more inclined through immediate sort of clicks and transparency to trust a brand that actually ensures and guarantees the supply chain versus something that's potentially corruptible. So it is something that is very topical. We're working with banks, as you know, with pharma, as you know, healthcare providers. I think one of the concerns that one of our healthcare providers actually put up was, do we share this information with insurers? So again, it's that collaboration, that communication, and as my colleague Accenture put out, having that point conduit so that we can all align and agree on the outcomes to create value, whether it be for our end consumers, our shareholders, or our stakeholders.
Really, that really resonates, and I think great to hear your views there. Maybe Wai Ying, maybe you could, as you've been across industries and you've seen different blockchains, are the challenges the same across industries, and kind of how did you overcome those?
I would say from a broad perspective, the challenges are similar in terms of being able to pull different participants together for them to agree the objectives of why they want to come together and be part of this community. But I would also say that there are certain industries that have clearly recognized that blockchain technology is the way to go in terms of being able to help protect their core revenues or their market share at this point in time, right? For example, in the financial services industry, this is where adoption is a lot higher, right? And you see even international networks, cross-border networks. In another industry, for example, in mining, where people are looking, for example, whether it's nickel or aluminum, customers are asking for more sustainable or less, more greener products, right? Even when it comes to an industry like mining. And that's where I go with this becomes the standard because the consumers is asking it and because then the customers of these mining companies are asking for it, right? Will they pay more for it? Not necessarily, but that's what they expect, right? So if you're not doing it, then you are one step behind, you're not protecting your market share, you're not protecting your core revenues, right? In other industries, as we see over time, definitely in the area of trade finance and back to the banking example, right? The adoption is a lot higher. There are some consortiums out there. There are some use cases, especially in the case of the e-bill of ladings that has taken quite a while, and it's still continuing that journey to try and get more adoption. But you have to imagine that industry and that value chain is very complex and goes back about 500 years ago when the bill of lading is still a piece of paper, right? As it is today. Now, things haven't changed, neither has the regulatory framework around it changed dramatically, but of course there's a lot more effort to put together not just the regulatory framework, but also to get the major participants to be part of it. So I would say that part of the industry is going down the right path. It just needs a bit more momentum, and we will probably see in the next few years this coming to some form of fruition. There are other industries which are more maybe process-related industry that is taking a longer time to adopt the technology. So for example, in the case of oil and gas, I know Lorraine mentioned about agri. So that's also a challenging aspect of when it's process-based and non-discrete, right? How do you then track the sustainability or the source of origin? And especially when you have a lot of SMEs as part of the value chain, how do you bring them together? And they would see it as providing too much visibility to the ecosystem and maybe to some of the authorities as well. So definitely different levels of maturity, different levels of adoption and challenges in looking at this industry. But I think over the number of years, people have come quite far from asking, so what is blockchain and how can I use it, to more of, I would like to be part of this. Is there a consortium? Should I be a participant, or should I be helping to shape the community and the industry adoption of this?
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mayi. Maybe I just wanted to circle back, Dr. Karen. You mentioned about the EMR being a perfect use case for blockchain, and obviously for this to work, it really needs to be a kind of an open standards, open kind of solution. Do you, in your opinion, do you see this on the horizon? Do you see it?
Yeah, so Daniel, I would think that it is, and I think that's where we have blockchain as well as FHIR, where we're looking at open standards and interoperability as well. And I think the future, if you're trying to integrate all these systems through IT, it's going to take a decade. So that's where we're looking at blockchain. But having said that, I would definitely share some of the concerns that have been raised in healthcare, namely around, when you have whether the data is really private, right? Because sometimes the identity of those who access that data is kept hidden. So one of the concerns is always around security, whether the data is really secure, whether we can maintain privacy. That is one for sure. Second is, in terms of healthcare, sometimes there have been issues in scaling up. So when it's like a small consortium, limited amount of data, it is easier. But when you kind of pan out and you're looking at hospitals across different markets, that's when then the challenge comes in as to whether blockchain can it really scale up. And also in some cases, some of the hospitals have mentioned that it's expensive in terms of energy consumption. It needs high power compute, and whether the technology is really foolproof, whether it's mature enough. And then, as you know, like when you look at pharma, when you look at healthcare, it's highly regulated, especially pharma. So one of the things that they always ask for is, is there any standards around blockchain? What's the governance around that? So I think those are some of the areas which still need a bit of development before you can have a much wider acceptance. And I think this time is really good because post-COVID, a lot of providers have been looking to kind of integrate silo data sets. And I think that's where blockchain really comes in. So I think the opportunity is right. And it's just that we still need to address a few issues before it can really scale up.
Thanks, Karen. Actually, you hit a great point. I guess there's one of the myths, maybe not a myth, around blockchain is it's expensive. So you see gas prices of Ethereum. Maybe over to Ernie, how can we change this perception for, say, enterprise blockchain, where you're not using kind of public blockchain with these really high costs?
Well, when it comes to like the public blockchains, right, the reason why we have transaction fees is to prevent spam and to promote democracy in the network as well, right? We want people to pay for what they use, and therefore the use of why transaction fees are implemented into Ethereum, for example. But of course, the kind of heavy use of it, like the hype around decentralized finance, NFTs, have pushed up the demand, and that pushes up the transaction fees, right? But intuitively as a system, in terms of the economics behind it, it does make sense because participants pay for what they use, right? But when it comes to like enterprise blockchains, then it's a totally different concept, right? You want to host a node, you have to pay for the hosting cost. So that is still a cost, right? And you are in fact paying for the end, because every node is replicated. You are running the same amount of transactions as the entire network. So you're not just paying for what you use, you're paying for what the whole network uses, in fact, right? So in fact, it is more expensive, right? So, but and therefore, like, we do want to think about what is the future for blockchain networks, right? Would it be this sort of closed enterprise systems only for enterprise applications, or would they start tapping onto the public blockchains, right? Because the main idea, and if we looked at the survey earlier on as well, what people want when they adopt enterprise blockchain is they want the transparency of the data, and so they want to trust the data digitally. They want to be able to, not have to go offline, to verify this kind of information, right? So a public blockchain can in fact be able to provide that, right? So we saw that for example, the Singapore government has implemented this open cert standards, right? And it was used for vaccine certs, right? Only hashes are put on the blockchain, right? And it is on a public blockchain, in fact, right? So if we want that verifiability, we can do it that way. We don't have to, run expensive blockchain networks. That are probably more expensive to run than, say, your intranet systems, right? So we do want to see, the evolution of the public blockchain space is quite important for us, even for enterprise adoption. We want to see how that matures, how that kind of settled down in terms of the scalability, in terms of the efficiency, right? And enterprise ecosystem should consider how to tap onto these, right? To really extract the value from these public blockchains, but at the same time, we can design the systems in such a way that we still keep the data private, right? In terms of medical records, we can keep the records still on premise. We put the hashes on chain, right? We can think about all these kind of different design elements that we can put in, right? To really still get the benefit that we want as enterprises from the blockchain features. But at the same time, we tap onto public blockchains that are running, and they are run by, tens and thousands of nodes, right? Not like enterprise blockchains that are just run by a few, right? So that increases the security as well.
Okay. Oh no, that's great. Thanks so much. And maybe Wei Ying, from your perspective, as you've seen this in multiple industries, what's kind of driving some of the business cases around the adoption of blockchain?
In the enterprise blockchain side, right? It's really the recognition that it is going to be a game changer, and it will be part of the industry standard that the technology will be adopted, right? And I think there are certain industries where the organizations are quite realistic with the types of ROIs you can get from having such a blockchain network, right? It is not a case where you expect lots of revenue, but it becomes a BAU moving forward, right? And you would expect 7-8 years to be able to do a break even. And that's when it gets serious in terms of if I want to be part of this, right? The type of investment I need to put in and the type of value that I would be able to extract, and how does this evolve over time, right? Because it's a community, it's a network, there are services on the platform. It needs to continue to evolve. You need to add additional services, add new participants to it, help to foster and make sure that it flourishes before the value can really be extracted. So being realistic with what you could get out of a blockchain network in a short term versus the longer term, and for the industry, is a key area of consideration.
Okay, no, thanks so much. And look, I could talk about this all day. Maybe a final, Lorraine. Maybe what you're seeing in SAP about the same is a kind of specific use case, business case type problems that people are coming to you with.
They do. It's no surprise. It's they want to know what their ROI is going to be, what their expected value, what their expected investment is going to yield. And when it comes to shareholders and stakeholders, it's about what they can also then publicly share about what the technology has given to them. We have one. Accenture just mentioned mining, for instance. You wouldn't expect that, but we've actually, with that blockchain capability, also created a model for them whereby which they're now tiering on ESG initiatives. There's vendors not tiering on spend, so they can control that to drive their efficacy and therefore drive their brand equity into the broader world. Again, we spoke about the fact that some people have concerns around security, but what COVID has taught us is supply chain resilience is really adhered to and also maximised during situations that was just faced in COVID, whereby which organisations that had this kind of technology backboned by not just one. So yes, blockchain is part of it, but then you've got analytics that drive through. You've got IoT connections. You've got other functionality. It's not just the technology. I think our previous panel actually made that point. It's not just the one technology, but certainly that level of trust is enhanced. We finished one model with a dairy agri company that wanted to know the origins of where the milk was coming from and so forth, and basically be able to say that it's coming from a company that is maintaining their carbon footprint, as well as maintaining their transparent SMP pricing, as well as it comes through to the consumer, what the packaging, processing and profile of that product is. So really, if you think of your story as well, when you had that recall test case, think of the ROI on being able to call back a product instead of 18 months down to 2 to 3 weeks. What you've just saved on is time, people, effort. You've also created visibility, transparency, whereby which you can even see that value coming to fruition in your total operating costs. So the OEE comes into it, right? So when it comes to ROI, it's not just about the blockchain. It's about all the other elements that you have basically yielded in that business case, which is just the what I just mentioned: people, time, resources, fingers, toes, business processes, and so forth. So digital transformation in this technology isn't just about the blockchain. It's about all the other things you can connect to it to maintain and create that resilience to COVID phase 2. You know what I mean? So it's you really open up different opportunities, and as we've seen in some cases, look at the organisations that scaled during COVID and look at their profile of their technology. They have that aptitude and that amplitude to actually scale. So I think when it comes to what our customers are seeing, again, it's what Wei said, there's ESG initiatives that are being driven. People want to know that the value isn't just to the shareholders and stakeholders in bottom line benefits, but it's also top line growth, creating brand equity that increases your value as a brand. But it's also about creating that level of trust through the technologies that you've multiply used to go to the next level. I mean, we're talking to an organisation right now that wants to integrate augmented reality as well as their supply chain capability. We're even sucking in searches and driving sentiment analysis through to that application. So you're really creating a minimized click, which also creates that ROI for that organisation, right? They want that value, they want that equity, and it's translating that into new business models that drive their business portfolio.
Well, thanks so much, Lorraine. Look, as I say, we could talk about this all day, but we've got some time for questions that have come in. Maybe first up, this one's to you, Ernie. Today we're starting to see enterprise blockchain picking up in Asia. How can we build greater blockchain awareness and trust in this region?
Well, the association has been kind of working with other associations in the region. So we have actually formed an ASEAN consortium for blockchain as well. And it covers like, the usual suspects, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines as well, and including Australia as well as part of the consortium. So we do want to work together to see how we can set standards. Our chairman, he's part of the IEEE Blockchain Standards Committee as well. And it's very interesting because the committee don't just cover things like cryptocurrency standards. They look at blockchain implementation and all sorts of different areas as well. There's about like 5 different areas that they look at. So I think it is an ongoing effort. Like even in Singapore, when the MAS recently announced their cryptocurrency kind of advertising guidelines, the association actually worked together as a group, as an industry group, to respond to that. So associations do have quite an important role to play here. I think we can play a role of aligning among our member companies, aligning across the region, partners across the region, right? And to kind of bring together this sort of standards. And And when it comes to standards, if we really think about enterprise blockchain adoption, right? It's not really blockchain standards, but really document standards, right? And how you structure the data schema within these documents. And those actually we have to revert back to like the individual industries to lead this as well.
Thank you. The next one has come in, and I think, seeing as though we have SAP, Accenture, Microsoft, I'll open it up to see who wants to go first. What are some of the considerations businesses need to make before adopting new technologies such as blockchain for supply chain? So I don't know who wants to go first. Anybody?
Yeah, so I think in terms of adopting new technology, it's certainly being able to look at the technology fitting the business needs, right? So from an aspect of blockchain, it is about the interoperability as well as the scalability, right? Because your business is not going to stay stagnant and you do want to scale. And how do you then take the network that you have established, right, that you have worked hard to establish, and the community that you have built, how do you continue to then leverage that technology as your business change? So for me, it's about interoperability to be able to then bring other parties on board, right? Whether it's within the ecosystem or even across industries with other networks, and the scalability of the solution and also of the ecosystem.
I would agree with that. I'm just going to say that one of the key considerations when we talk to our customers is, in fact, feasibility, scalability, and operator. So there's a whole bunch of criteria that you need to collaborate with your customer to understand. And this kind of technology is here to stay. So when you're talking about AI, augmented reality, blockchain, it's here to stay. So our customers need to understand that to be ready for the next groundbreaking piece of world-shattering things like COVID that happens, that resilience is required. And so that resilience can be backstopped or can be actually answered through technologies. It's not the only answer, but it's a series of different technologies that can provide the insights, visibility, agility, and transparency for an organisation to be able to operate during times of restrictions and times of need. I think especially in the commodities industry where things are moving, and especially in the dire situation we're in now, Ukraine and so forth, we're seeing prices being unstable and so forth. So having that connect to value is really important, and I think helping customers understand where that value can be derived in incremental steps. But as you would know, your journey wasn't, we're turning on blockchain. It was a series of readiness, right? So you have to be there with the customer on the journey to explain what they need, collaborate with them, collaborate with your partners, and collaborate with the ecosystem so that they can see the value and then have the aha moment and continue on that journey.
Okay, great, thanks. Dr. Karen, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, from a perspective of healthcare, I would probably agree with what earlier was shared, that I think, typically in healthcare, especially in the public sector, we do work through tenders, right? So the governments come out with tenders. And I think one of the ways in which we could help in better adoption of new technology, could be blockchain, could be any other, is also in proposing solutions that involve these technologies. So you do have your typical tender requirements, but one of the things that I've found that works very well, and this is not just for blockchain, if you look at FHIR, for example, for interoperability, you can always kind of move the needle a bit more and say, hey, there are other technologies that are available, and you might want to kind of do like an MVP to see the feasibility, or even create a sandbox to see how these solutions can be deployed. So I think somewhere from the industry perspective as well, one of the mandates, if I can say, is to help or educate people on what technology is available and be able to help them understand how we can integrate that for better outcomes. I think that has sometimes worked much better in advancing new technologies like blockchain or FHIR as well.
Thanks for that. And I heard, I think everybody mentioned the word interoperability. So there's a question come in, and I think it's actually aimed at me more than anything because it's very Easy Tracker specific. So any smart contract element involved in Easy Tracker or just acts as a normal type of blockchain database. So I think really the topic everybody raised around interoperability is something that has always been top of mind for what we've tried to do with Easy Tracker. We always wanted to make it vendor agnostic, interoperable, can run on any blockchain provider, and I think that leads into how do we join it together, and it's obviously through the use of smart contracts to join this data. I think for us, it's always been about adoption and being able to deliver a solution that can be used by a patient to basically make their lives better and verify a product and be given a degree of confidence that product is a genuine product. So really being able to do that has been the kind of outgoing instance and being able to make the solution work in such a way. I'm conscious we're running out of time, and I really want to hear one last thing from each of you. So really, let's go around the table. In the coming 2 years, what can you expect from blockchain and supply chain? So maybe, Lorraine, you want to kick us off with a quick 1 minute where you think we're going to be in 2 years' time?
It's standard feature, no different to what we're talking about, cloud. It's part of standard feature. We're seeing banks and central banks talking about it. We're seeing currencies derived. We're seeing information being shared. So it's one of the Lego pieces, if I could use that term, that is actually going to be driving supply chain responses. So I see it as congruent to being a constant, along with other technologies, like we're seeing AI really have that impact into supply chains, more for the more for checking efficacy and so forth. So I think it's here to stay. So it's something that we're going to see more of rather than less of, in conjunction with other technologies, because it's constantly evolving, and that's the fun part.
Completely agree. Wai Ying?
Yeah, I think what I like to see, and maybe it's going towards this direction, it's also to look at it from a slightly different perspective, that supply chain traceability is giving us a set of trusted data and information, right? And so how may the organizations and the various authorities leverage on this trusted data, trusted digital data, to look at expediting processes, whether it is from the clearance of customs, or is it a facilitation of trade financing, that this is now a true trade, right, rather than it being a fraudulent transaction. So how can we leverage this new trusted information that we have, that I think more and more organizations are going to embark on providing that supply chain traceability across the different industry? How do we then expound on the information that's coming through to facilitate bigger and broader business processes that relate to the supply chain?
Thank you. And Dr. Karen, I'd love to hear your views on healthcare, but also Microsoft's view on this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I mean, I was just thinking, sitting here, hearing all the views, that I think one of the things, and I'm not sure if the other panelists would agree, I think one of the things that can give blockchain that impetus, and it could be in any industry, but healthcare specifically, and I'm mirroring the success that we've had in vaccines. Within a short period of time, everybody knew that blockchain was super essential for vaccine manufacturing and supply. So I was thinking that it could be that within healthcare industry, one might want to pick up critical areas, where outcomes, where the conditions are critical, outcomes really have to be perfect, and there isn't much time. So for example, areas like cancer, where you're looking at, every cancer now, even if you have 10 people having same lung cancer, the tumor types are all different. So is there a way that we could expedite blockchain in healthcare by using it for specific scenarios, like getting that data ready and available for genomic research to be able to find cures for cancer. Instead of kind of having the whole industry try to adopt blockchain, like vaccines, we might want to pick up few areas where they could really lead in the use of that trusted data. I think that might help leapfrog the adoption of blockchain.
Oh, thank you. And Ernie, I think the final word with you.
Right. So I think what I hope to see in the next 2 years would probably be the introduction of commerce into enterprise blockchains, right? So as we see that governments are pushing central bank digital currencies, right? And that can pave the way for commerce to actually enter enterprise blockchains. And there's a lot of existing methods we see in public blockchains, such as currency swaps, that can help to introduce these digital dollars into your own enterprise blockchain systems, right? And a lot of things we can learn from the smart contracts that are being used right now in the public blockchain space as well to kind of automate a lot of these transactions and actions as well. So I hope to see that convergence going forward.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Look, this has been fantastic. I want to really thank everybody, the panelists, for spending the time today and sharing your views on where we see blockchain going in not just supply chain, across the healthcare and other industries as well. So thank you. Thanks for your time. With that, I'll hand back to Michelle.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ernie, Karen, Waying, Lauren, and Daniel for sharing with us the value that blockchain can unlock for enterprises. We are genuinely grateful to all our panelists for their time and valuable contribution to our discussions today, and to the audience for sharing their questions and thoughts during the sessions. Also, as you may have heard, EasyTracker conducted a survey this year in 7 markets with over 2,000 respondents about their perceptions and attitudes towards counterfeits. If you are interested to receive the survey results and find out more when we release the final roundup, simply indicate that in the survey, and the EasyTracker team will add you to their mailing list. At the end of this event, you will be prompted by Zoom and will be taken to the survey. For more news about digital and data in pharma, thought leadership articles, upcoming conferences, and more, we invite you to follow us on LinkedIn at Zuellig Pharma Digital and Data. If you have any questions about how we can get you and your business started with EasyTracker, reach out to our representatives today at easytracker@zuelligpharma.com. On behalf of the digital and data team at Zuellig Pharma, we would like to thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. We hope you have enjoyed the discussions and insights around achieving pharma supply chain resilience in today's digital world. Goodbye, and wishing you a good evening ahead.